What would you do if someone you loved, maybe a family member, maybe a friend, got sick, and then out of nowhere made a spontaneous recovery and seemed to be different, changed somehow, almost as though it wasn't them looking back at you? Well, in today's story, we will be talking about that. We will be reading a story in which that very thing happens. And at the end of the story, I'm going to give my spiel about what I would do, and maybe what we can apply from this. Today's story was published on the r No Sleep subreddit by Soft Statement 7443, and it's entitled, "My son changed after his illness, and I'm terrified, but I'm the only one that sees it." And it starts like this. I don't know if this is the right place to post this. I'm sorry for how long this will be, but I feel like if I don't write it all down, exactly as it happened, I'm going to shatter into a million pieces. My husband Thomas is a good man, a kind man, and he's trying to help, but his help feels like a cage. He looks at me with this deep, sorrowful pity in his eyes, and it's a look that says, my poor wife is broken. He's scheduling appointments with doctors whose names I don't even want to know. I can't talk to my mother or my sister because the moment the words leave my mouth, I know it will happen. The cornered silence on the other end of the phone, the gentle suggestions, the hushed conversations with Thomas behind my back. How do you tell the people you love that you're afraid of your own child? How do you say, I think my son isn't my son anymore, and not have them take him from you and put you somewhere soft? So I'm writing to you, strangers, because you're all I have left. Please just read this. Before, our life was real. It was messy and loud and exhausting and so deeply, achingly beautiful. Our son Leo had turned 6 in the spring. He was a force of nature, a small human hurricane. He was left-handed, a trait he got from my father, and his little fist would curl so tightly around his crayons that his knuckles would turn white. His homework papers were always a mess of graphite smudges, a testament to his effort. He was obsessed with dinosaurs, a walking encyclopedia of the Cretaceous period. He could pronounce Parasaurolophus with the crisp authority of a paleontologist, but still, without fail, called spaghetti. He was a terrible sleeper. He fought it every night, as if it were a mortal enemy of his. And most mornings, we'd wake up with him wedged between us, a warm, sharp-elbowed little furnace, his feet inevitably planted in Thomas's back. I used to complain about it. I'd stumble into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, and mutter about never getting a full night's sleep. What I would give to be woken up by one of his bony knees in my spine right now. His world was built on a foundation of intense, specific loves. He loved his stuffed bear, Barnaby, a threadbare creature with one remaining button eye and fur matted with years of tears, drool, and affection. He loved pancakes, but only if I let them get a little too brown around the edges, giving them a crunchy crust. He despised waffles with a passion, he usually reserved for bedtime, claiming the little squares were tricky, and stole the syrup. He loved the color orange, not bright orange, but the deep burnt orange of autumn leaves. He loved the feel of my old silk scarf, which he'd rub against his cheek when he was tired. He loved the rumbling groan of the garbage truck on Tuesday mornings, a sound that would send him sprinting to the window. He was a universe of tiny, specific, wonderful details. He was ours. He was Leo. The fever started on a Wednesday. It began as nothing. A little cough at bedtime, a forehead that felt a degree too warm. I gave him some Motrin and tucked him in, thinking nothing of it. By midnight, he was screaming. Not a sick cry, but a scream of pure agony. His body was a furnace. The digital thermometer, when I could finally get it to stay under his tongue, read 104.2, a fear like nothing I had ever known. A cold primal terror seized me by the throat and squeezed. We've all had sick kids, the fevers, the stomach bugs. This was different. This felt like an invasion. For the next 72 hours, our world shrank to the 4 walls of his dinosaur-themed bedroom. The air grew thick and heavy with the smell of sickness, that metallic, cloyingly sweet scent of a body at war with itself. We lived in a blurry, sleep-deprived nightmare. We took turns holding cold compresses to his forehead, his neck, his wrists. We had frantic, whispered conversations with the on-call pediatrician who kept saying, as long as he's hydrated, as long as he's responsive, just monitor him. But he wasn't really responsive. He was delirious, his eyes glassy and unfocused, muttering a stream of nonsense words and phrases that didn't connect. He didn't know who we were. He thrashed in his sleep, his small body rigid with tension, his limbs jerking. Thomas was my anchor in that storm. He was calm when I was sobbing, practical when I was falling apart. He charted every temperature, every dose of medicine, every sip of water Leo managed to get down. But I saw the terror behind his calm facade. I saw it in the tremor of his hands as he measured out the Tylenol. in the way he'd just stand in the doorway for long stretches of the night, watching the shallow rise and fall of Leo's chest. He was helpless. And for a man like Thomas, a man who fixes things, helplessness is his own kind of hell. I held Leo's hand, so hot, it felt like holding a live coal. I prayed. I'm not a religious person, but in that dark, silent room, I prayed to every god I could think of, to the universe, to anything that might be listening. I begged, I bargained, I promised that I would be a better mother, a better wife, a better person. I would never complain about being tired again, never be impatient when he asked why for the 100th time, never take a single precious, ordinary moment for granted if he would just come back to us. On Saturday morning, I woke with a start, slumped in the uncomfortable armchair, my neck bent at a painful angle. The first thing I registered was the silence. The ragged, labored breathing that had been the soundtrack to our nightmare for 3 days was gone. In its place was a quiet, even rhythm, and the room was cold. The oppressive, suffocating heat that had radiated from the bed had vanished. I scrambled forward, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my palm to his forehead. It was cool, damp with sweat, but blessedly, miraculously cool. As my hand made contact, his eyelids fluttered open. The glassiness was gone. His eyes, the same deep, clear blue as his father's, were focused. They looked right at me. Mommy? His voice was a dry, cracked whisper, but it was his. It was his voice. A sob tore out of my chest, a raw, ugly animal sound of pure, unadulterated relief. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, wrapping my arms around his small, fragile frame, burying my face in his sweet, damp hair, inhaling the scent of my son. He was back. He was here. Thomas must have heard me because he came running into the room, his face pale, exhausted. When he saw Leo, awake, conscious, looking at us, his composure finally broke. He just crumpled. He fell to his knees by the bed, his broad shoulders shaking as he wept without a sound. The next day, Sunday, was the most beautiful day of my life. It felt like the world had been reborn in full color. The house itself seemed to exhale, to relax. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating, dancing, dusting motes like tiny, joyful sprites. Thomas made his famous "everything's okay" pancakes, and the warm, sweet smell of melting butter and maple syrup filled every room, chasing out the last ghosts of sickness. Leo was weak, his movements slow, but he was smiling. He laughed, a real musical laugh, when our golden retriever, Buster, slathered his face with happy, wet licks. Every sound, every sight, felt like a sacred gift. I watched him sitting on the living room floor, slowly clicking his Legos together, his small brow furrowed in concentration, and I felt a profound, bone-deep gratitude that was almost painful in its intensity. The storm had passed. We had survived. I was so happy. I was so drunk on relief that I didn't see it. I didn't recognize the first sign for what it was. It happened on Monday morning. Our first attempt at a return to routine. I put a plate of pancakes in front of him. The edges burnt just the way he liked them. Thomas, already dressed for work, ruffled his hair. "Think you're strong enough to tackle that stack, champ?" Leo smiled. It was a perfect, heart-melting smile that reached his eyes. He picked up his fork with his right hand. It was such a small thing, a tiny, insignificant detail. It was like a single, sharp pebble hitting a vast pane of glass. A barely perceptible sound, a hairline fracture you could only see if you caught it in just the right light. I just stared at his hand. He pierced a piece of pancake, dipped it in a pool of syrup, and brought it to his mouth with a smooth, easy coordination. There was no awkwardness, no fumbling, none of the clumsy hesitation of a child using their non-dominant hand. It was natural, effortless, innate. "Honey," I said, forcing my voice to sound light, casual, like I was making playful observation. "You're using your other hand." Thomas glanced up from his phone, where he was scrolling through emails. "So? Maybe the fever rewired his brain. I read an article about that once, something about neuroplasticity, ambidexterity. It's a sign of genius, you know." He was trying to make a joke, to dismiss my concern before it could take root. "No, Thomas, you don't understand," I insisted. My eyes fixed on Leo. He's never done this, not for anything. I turned my focus back to our son. "Sweetheart, try with your special hand, your drawing hand." Leo stopped chewing. He looked at me, his head tilted slightly, and in that moment I saw something I had never seen in him before. It wasn't the simple, open confusion of a child being corrected. It was a flicker of something else, something analytical. It was the brief, still pause of a performer who has been told they missed a cue, a researcher being presented with unexpected data. He looked down at the fork in his right hand, then at his empty left hand resting on the table, as if they were two unfamiliar tools he was evaluating for the first time. Then he looked back at me, his blue eyes clear and unnervingly steady, and said, "But I've always done it this way, Mommy. A chill, cold and sharp and deeply unsettling, shaked its way down my spine. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a child's fib or a moment of defiance. He said it with the flat, unwaveringly certainty of a person stating their own name. He genuinely believed it, a core fact of his existence, a detail as fundamental as his handedness had been rewritten, and he was the only one who didn't know it. "Eleanor, stop," Thomas said gently, his hand covering mine on the table. I hadn't even realized my own was clenched into a tight white-knuckled fist. "You're exhausted? We both are. Let's not invent problems where there aren't any. He's alive, he's healthy. That's all that matters." He smiled at Leo, who smiled back, a perfect mirror of paternal affection. And in that moment, I felt a chasm open up at the breakfast table. Thomas and Leo on one side, smiling in the bright morning sun, and me on the other, suddenly alone in cold, encroaching shadow. That was the beginning. And once you start looking for cracks, you see them everywhere. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at night, maybe you start making them up yourself. The changes were subtle at first, a slow accumulation of wrong details that, in isolation, could all be explained away. Leo had always been a whirlwind of noise. The house had been filled with a constant soundtrack of his chatter, his tuneless humming, the vroom vroom of his toy cars, the roar of his plastic dinosaurs. Now, the house was often quiet, eerily so. He would play for hours in his room, silently, meticulously. He'd line up his toy cars in perfect color-coordinated rows. He'd build Lego towers that were perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced. Feats of engineering that the old, chaotic Leo would never have had the patience for. Thomas saw it as a positive development. "He's got a newfound focus," he'd say, beaming with pride. The fever must have matured him. I saw it as unnerving. The joyful, chaotic mess of his play had been replaced by a cold, sterile order. One afternoon, I found him in the living room, just standing in front of the bookshelf. He wasn't pulling out books or trying to climb it, as he might have done before. He was standing perfectly still, his head tilted, reading the spines of Thomas's dense physics and engineering textbooks. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked from the doorway. "Learning," he said without turning around. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual childish lit. "That's a bit advanced for you, don't you think?" I tried to keep my tone light, playful. He turned and looked at me. His expression was serious, impassive. "You have to start somewhere," he said, with the weary patience of a professor addressing a particularly slow student. Then he blinked, and the expression vanished, replaced by a perfect 6-year-old smile. "Can I have a snack?" When I told Thomas about it later that evening, he just laughed. "He's a sponge. He's just repeating things he's heard me say. A brilliant boy." Thomas's pride was a shield, a thick, impenetrable wall against my growing fear. Every strange, cold thing Leo did, Thomas reframed as a sign of intelligence, of maturity, of recovery. He was so desperate for everything to be okay, so grateful to have his son back, that he couldn't let himself see that the boy who came back was not the one we had lost. The emotional disconnect was the hardest part. It was like a fundamental circuit in his personality had been snipped. Our old Leo was a creature of deep, sometimes overwhelming empathy. If I had stubbed my toe and yelped, he'd have tears in his eyes. If a character was sad in a movie, he'd need to climb into my lap or be held. That part of him, that sweet, sensitive core, was just gone. Our goldfish Bubbles died. It was an ancient, sad-looking fish that Leo had won at a school fair. I found it floating at the top of the bowl one morning and braced myself for the inevitable meltdown. The old Leo would have been inconsolable. There would have been a tearful bathroom funeral, 1,000 questions about life and death and fishy heaven. I called Leo into the kitchen. He stood on his little stool and peered into the bowl. Expression unreadable. "Bubbles is gone, sweetheart," I said, rubbing his back. "I'm so sorry." Leo didn't look at me. He tapped the glass with his finger. "His homeostatic processes have failed," he stated, his voice as clinical as a lab report. The lack of sufficient oxygenation in the water led to his widespread cellular death. "Can we dissect him to see his heart?" I physically recoiled. I snatched my hand back from his shoulder, as if I had been burnt. It wasn't the morbid curiosity of a child. It was the detached academic interest of a scientist examining a specimen. I felt sick. I flushed the fish down the toilet, my hands shaking, and told him we couldn't have. He just shrugged. "Okay." No tears, no more questions, just a quiet, unnerving acceptance. Thomas's explanation. "He's processing it intellectually. It's a coping mechanism, Elle. He's protecting himself from the sadness. He's a smart kid. He was always a smart kid." That became the answer, I think. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I was constantly on edge, my nerves stretched taut, watching him, analyzing every word, every gesture. I became a detective in my own home, a spy in my own family, and I knew it. I am absolutely certain of it. He started to play a game with me, a quiet, cruel game of psychological warfare where he was the only other player who knew the rules. It started with gaslighting, so subtle I barely noticed it at first, small things. I'd be certain I left my keys on the hook by the door, a habit of a lifetime. We'd spent 20 minutes turning the house upside down only for Leo to find them in the fruit bowl. "Silly mommy," he'd say, his voice sweet as honey, and Thomas would give me a look, that worried, pitying look that was becoming more and more frequent. One evening, I was paying bills at the kitchen table, my head swimming with numbers and spreadsheets. "This doesn't add up," I muttered to myself, rubbing my temples. From the living room, where he was building a perfectly symmetrical Lego castle, his quiet voice piped up clear as a bell. "You carried the 1 incorrectly in the 3rd column of the utility bill." I froze, my pen hovering over the paper. I checked my math. He was right. A simple, stupid addition error I'd overlooked 3 times. I stared at the back of his head, my blood running cold. He didn't even look up from his castle. He was isolating me from Thomas, and he was brilliant at it. He learned to perform. The moment he heard Thomas's car in the driveway, his entire demeanor would shift. He'd become a bright, bubbly, affectionate 6-year-old. He'd run into the door, throw his arms around his father's legs, and shower him with affection. He'd say, "I love you, Daddy," a dozen times an evening. He never said it to me anymore, not once since the fever. The moment Thomas was out of the room to take a shower or make a phone call, the performance would stop. The bright, loving smile would vanish, replaced by that flat, watchful neutrality. It was like a light switch being flipped off. The change was so abrupt, so complete, it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to talk to Thomas about it. Again and again, I tried to explain the shift, the 2 versions of Leo. He'd listen, his face etched with concern, and then he'd say things like, "Honey, kids act differently with each parent. It's normal." Or maybe, "He's still angry with you for all the medicine you had to give him. He'll get over it." Or the one that hurt the most, "Eleanor, I think you're projecting your own anxiety onto him. You're looking for problems." I even tried calling my mother. I started to tell her, my voice trembling, "Mom, something's different about Leo since he was sick." But as I heard the words out loud, I heard how they sounded. I heard the inevitable follow-up questions, the concern that would quickly shift from Leo to me. I faltered and ended up saying that he was just being quiet and moody. "It's probably just post-viral fatigue, dear," she'd say. And I'd agree and change the subject, feeling more alone than ever. The final decisive campaign against my sanity was waged over a simple glass of milk. We were at the dinner table. Thomas was telling a long, animated story about a problem at his engineering firm. I was only half listening. I was watching Leo, who has pushed his peas around his plate with his fork. He caught my eye. He'd held my gaze, his own eyes unblinking, impassive, and then, slowly, with a deliberate, almost graceful movement, he nudged his full glass of milk with his elbow until it tipped over the edge of the table and crashed onto the floor, shattering. "Leo!" I shouted, jumping to my feet, as milk and shards of glass spread across the hardwood. Before Thomas could even react, Leo's face crumpled. He burst into the most theatrical, heart-wrenching sobs I had ever heard. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "It wasn't my fault," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "Mommy was looking at me funny. She had a scary face. She scared me, and I jumped." Thomas rushed to his side, scooping him up out of his chair, away from the mess. "Shh, it's okay, buddy. It was an accident. It's okay." He held Leo, murmuring soothing words, and over his son's shaking shoulders, he gave me a look of profound disappointment and fear. But the fear wasn't for Leo, it was for me. That night, after he tucked Leo in and read him an extra story, the conversation I had been dreading finally happened. He closed our bedroom door and stood there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of sorrow. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with a pain that broke my heart, "we can't go on like this. You're a bundle of nerves. You're jumping at shadows. You're yelling at him for spilling milk. He told me he's scared of you sometimes." "He's not scared of me, Thomas. He's playing you. He did it on purpose, can't you see?" The words sounded shrill and unhinged, even to my own ears. I sounded like a madwoman. "Do you hear yourself? Do you honestly hear what you're saying? He's a 6-year-old child who almost died 3 weeks ago. I think you're suffering from post-traumatic stress. I think you need to talk to someone. I made an appointment for you with a therapist, Dr. Mercier. It's on Thursday." The trap snapped shut. He had won. The creature wearing my son's face had successfully and completely painted me as the monster. I was no longer a mother protecting her child. I was a patient in need of a cure. I went to the appointment. I sat in the plush leather chair across from a kind, bearded man with gentle, condescending eyes. I told him everything. The right hand, the goldfish, the math problem, the milk. I watched him nod and take notes on a yellow legal pad. I could see the diagnosis forming in his mind as clearly as if it were written on his forehead. Post-traumatic stress, maternal anxiety, delusional paranoia, triggered by a child's near-death experience, potential for postpartum-like psychosis. He explained that it was perfectly normal for mothers to develop these feelings, this hypervigilance after a traumatic medical event. He prescribed me a low dose of anxiolytic. I took the prescription. I had to play the part. I had to appear sane, compliant. It was the only way I could stay in the game. At home, the creature, sensing its total and complete victory, grew bolder. It began systematically erasing the real Leo, memory by memory. The first drawing he had ever made for me, a chaotic, joyful squiggle of burnt orange crayon that I had kept on the fridge for 5 years, disappeared. I found it torn into tiny, meticulous, confetti-like squares at the bottom of the recycling bin. When I had asked him about it, his eyes went blank. It was messy, he said. His beloved Barnaby, the one-eyed bear, who had been his constant companion, was next. I found him stuffed headfirst in the kitchen trash can, buried under coffee grounds and eggshells. I pulled him out, my hands shaking with rage and grief. I'm too old for that, he told Thomas later, who praised him for being such a big boy and growing up so fast. Each erased memory was a physical stab in my heart. It felt like I was the only person left in a world who remembered the real Leo. I would scroll through old photos and videos on my phone at night, the blue light of the screen illuminating my silent tears, just to prove to myself that the smudged, left-handed, chaotic, empathetic little boy had been real. I had to get proof, something tangible, something Thomas and Dr. Mercier couldn't explain away with a diagnosis. My last desperate idea came on a Saturday afternoon. Thomas was out at Home Depot. The house was quiet. I sat down with Leo at his little art table in the corner of the living room. My heart was pounding, so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Let's draw, sweetie," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I had laid out a fresh piece of paper and a box of colored pencils. "Why don't you draw our family? Draw you and Daddy and me." He looked at me with a unwaveringly calm glaze for a moment, then picked up a black pencil. In his right hand, of course. He drew for nearly 15 minutes in total. Unnerving silence. His movements weren't the joyful, sweeping scribbles of a child. They were precise, controlled. The pencil held at a perfect angle, like an architect drafting a blueprint. Finally, he pushed the paper towards me across the table. Done. I leaned forward, and all the air left my body in a painful rush. It wasn't a drawing of a family. It was a diagram, a schematic, 3 figures, constructed from neat, sharp, angled geometric shapes. Rectangles for bodies, circles for heads. They had no faces, no hands, no hair. They were just forms. One tall, one small, one in between. Then below them, printed in perfect, clean, adult-looking block letters, were the names: Thomas, Leo, Eleanor. But that wasn't the part that made me want to scream. The figure labeled Eleanor was different from the others. It had been violently scribbled over. A furious, dense, chaotic web of black lines scratched her out, obliterating the neat shape beneath, as if trying to erase her from existence entirely. My voice was a whisper. What is that part?" I asked, my finger hovering over the black chaos that was supposed to be me. He looked at the drawing, then back at me. He raised his small, steady finger and pointed directly at the furiously scribbled-out figure. "You," he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion, any childishness. "You are the error." The sound of the garage door opening, the rumble echoing through the house, made me jump. Thomas was home, in a flash, in a movement too quick and fluid for a 6-year-old. Leo snatched the paper from the table, crumpled it into a tight, vicious ball, and tossed it perfectly into the wastebasket across the room just as Thomas walked in, whistling, holding a bag of mulch. "What are my 2 favorite artists up to?" he asked, smiling, oblivious. "Drawing," Leo chirped, his voice instantly transforming, becoming bright and sweet and innocent. He held up a different piece of paper, one with a single, perfectly drawn, technically flawless flower on it. I sat there, frozen, the words echoing in a silent, screaming space in my mind. "You are the error." This wasn't a phrase. This wasn't trauma. This was a project, a cleansing, and I was the variable that needed to be eliminated. That night, I knew I couldn't stay. I lay in bed, rigid, feigning sleep, listening to Thomas's steady breathing beside me. I was a prisoner in my own home, with a husband who had thought I was sick, and a child who wanted me gone. My plan was half-formed, a frantic blueprint drawn by adrenaline and terror. I would wait until Thomas was deeply asleep. I would go downstairs, get the drawing from the trash can. That was my proof, my only proof. Then, I would get Leo into the car, and I would drive. I would drive to my sister's house nearly 3 hours away. I would wake her up. I would show her the drawing, and I would make her believe me. Around 2 a.m., when the house was settling into its deepest silence, I slipped out of bed. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floor. I crept downstairs and, my hands shaking, retrieved the crumpled ball of paper from the wastebasket. I smoothed it out on the kitchen counter in the dim light of the microwave clock. It was all there. The schematic figures, the names, the violent erasure of me. My proof. My sanity. I folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of my robe. Then I went into his room. The star projector was on, casting a gentle, dancing starfield on the ceiling and the walls. He was asleep, his breathing even and quiet. For a heart-breaking second, in the soft, dim light, he just looked like my Leo, my beautiful, innocent boy. A wave of love so fierce, it was painful, washed over me. He was still in there. He had to be. This thing had stolen him, but he was still in there somewhere. I knelt by his bed and gently shook his shoulder. "Leo," I whispered. "Baby, it's Mommy. We have to go. We're going on a little trip." His eyes snapped open. They weren't sleepy or confused. They were wide, alert, and they glinted in the starlight like chips of blue ice. He looked right through me, and then he opened his mouth and screamed. It was not a scream of terror or surprise. It was a calculated, piercing, ear-splitting shriek of pure theatrical terror, a sound designed to wake the dead and summon armies. It was an alarm. "Mommy, no, you're hurting me. Don't touch me. Daddy, help!" The hallway. Light flashed on, blinding me. Thomas stood in the doorway, wide-eyed and frantic from being ripped from a deep sleep. His brain processed the scene in an instant. Me kneeling by the bed, my hands on his son, sitting bolt upright, screaming, cowering away from me as if I were holding a knife. "Eleanor, what the heck are you doing?" he roared, his voice crackling with sleep and horror. "Thomas, no, it's not what it looks like. He's lying." I scrambled to my feet, fumbling my pocket for the drawing. I can prove it, just look at this. But Thomas was already moving, crossing the room in 2 long strides, his face a mask of fury and terror. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at Leo. He scooped the screaming child into his arms, holding him tight. The creature buried its neck in its father's neck, its body racked with performative sobs, and over Thomas's shoulder. It lifted its head just enough to look at me. Its eyes were not crying, they were calm, cold, and utterly, devastatingly triumphant. The rest is a blur of noise and flashing lights, and deep, numbing shock. Thomas on the phone, his voice shaking. "My wife, she's having some kind of breakdown. I think she was trying to take him. I think she was trying to hurt our son." The police arriving, 2 of them, a man and a woman. The woman had kind, sad eyes. She asked me questions I couldn't answer. My mind, a static-filled void. I kept trying to tell them about the drawing, but in the chaos of being led out of the room, it was gone. It must have fallen out of my pocket. I begged them to look for it, to go back into the room, but they just gave me that same pitying, gentle look that Thomas and Dr. Mercier did. The look you give a person who is no longer a part of your reality. My last memory of my home is standing out on the front lawn in the cold, pre-dawn air, a coarse police blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Thomas stood on the porch, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights, holding Leo's hand in a white-knuckled grip. Leo wasn't crying anymore. He just stood there, silent and still, watching them lead me to the car, his face a perfect, placid blank. So now I'm here in this quiet place, with soft walls and kind nurses who call me Hun, and tell me I'm safe. Dr. Mercier visits twice a week. He says I'm making excellent progress and I'm starting to accept my diagnosis, a severe psychotic episode triggered by acute trauma and stress. It's a neat, tidy story. It makes sense to everyone. It explains everything. Thomas writes me letters filled with a sad, distant love. He doesn't visit Dr. Mercier. Says it's too soon, that it could be a trigger for me. He writes that Leo is doing so well. He's at the top of his class in reading and math. He's even started taking piano lessons. And he's a natural. He says the house is so calm now, so peaceful. He says he misses the woman I used to be. In his last letter, he included a photograph. It was taken at a school picnic last week. Thomas and Leo smiling under a big oak tree, squinting in the bright sun. They look happy. Thomas looks relaxed, younger. The deep lines of stress around his eyes have softened, and Leo, he looks perfect. A perfect, happy, handsome little boy in a bright orange t-shirt, his old favorite color. I've stared at this photograph for days. It sits on my nightstand, a testament to the life I destroyed, the family I broke. It's the final piece of evidence in the case against my sanity. But if you look closely, if you look past the smiling faces and the bright sunshine, you can see it. The tiny, perfect, soul-destroying detail. The thing that keeps me awake at night in this quiet, safe room. the thing that proves I'm not crazy and ensures that I will never ever be free. In the photograph, he's holding a half-eaten red apple. He's holding it in his left hand. He learned. The error has been corrected. The performance is now flawless. And I'm the only one in the world who knows. The end. Wow, that was a really long story. I did not expect it to take that long to read. It was actually really good, though. I was definitely invested in it, and I wanted to stick along the way. I think for a lot of the story, I was really thinking about how I could really see it both ways. I could genuinely see it as the mom overreacting, and I could genuinely see it as the mom genuinely being afraid of a thing that might have replaced or infected her son. I think children, they are so complicated. I took a few human development classes when I was in high school, and I love learning about how the human brain works, and I love studying psychology and all these things. And if there's anything I've learned, is that even children are terribly complex, and if you aren't trained to look for those things or to recognize that changes like this technically could happen, it could be super frustrating, and it could seem like something has completely, replaced your child. So I understand it from that point of view. I think at the same time, we have kind of two viewpoints here. We have the mom, who is a mother, somebody who's kind of designed to think like this, somebody who's designed to see these little things and notice these things because that's what they do best, right? They look for these similarities, they look for these coincidences so that they can, support their child. It's not a bad thing to do that. So when that kind of similarity starts being thrown off, when that character profile that she has of her child, of things that he likes, the things that he wants, the things that he does, is thrown off, it's probably very strange. And then on the other hand, you have the father. Now, it was explained that the father is an engineer, and so it kind of takes a special type of brain to be an engineer, and that type of brain, as a man, has a natural predisposition to look for solutions to problems. I think if there is any women who are listening to this, they would know from talking to men that when they tell a man their problems, the man almost always will try to fix the problems and not just listen. I think one of the most powerful quotes that I've ever heard in regards to how you should treat a woman is, sometimes women don't want a solution to their problems. They just want you to say that sucks and then just hug them. That's it. No fixes, no solutions, just that sucks. And in a way, that's its own solution. And I think because this is a man and he's naturally predisposed to want to try to fix problems, and add on to that the fact that he's an engineer, someone who is literally paid to fix problems, that's what he does. He looks for solutions. And so in a way, he sees something that's irregular, maybe even not even understanding that it's irregular, and he proposes a solution. That's what he does. That's what he does best. He has a double kind of personification of that. And so I really appreciate how the author, maybe unknowingly even, added that in. I really like the story a lot. I think it was a really good one. I think it was definitely deep. I think stories like this where you could genuinely see from both sides and say, well, maybe she was crazy. Maybe she wasn't crazy. I think those are the kind that kind of really keep you around and get you really invested and want to hear the end. I know this story doesn't really have a happy ending, but it does propose a lot of questions. What would you do in this scenario? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear if there is anywhere in the story that you might have done something differently. I think personally, from watching movies, reading stories and TV and all that, about maybe somebody in your life being switched out, I think that the smartest thing to do is to play along with it until you have a big enough case that it can't fail. Because if there is somebody who has been switched out in your life and you're on to them, but you have near no proof, like in the beginning when she noticed that he was using a different hand, what does it do if you try and expose them right away? It makes you a threat. You have to think about, okay, why are they infiltrating? Why are they trying to switch somebody out? Why are they trying to get into your life? Okay, so this is clearly something that poses a danger. And just like this, and it's a similar story where somebody is alienated and forced out, has been played out in movies and TV. So personally, I would say, if you have a suspicion of this, make a case. Don't just try and pull out little tiny facts. Make a case. And once it's too big to fail, present the case to somebody in a rational way that's, try to be as little emotion in that presentation as possible so that they can try and understand you from a purely objective standpoint. And then if they say, you know what, it still is crazy, well then, I guess just flip the switch and stop caring about it. And I know it's not that easy, but you're just going to have to try. And on the other hand, if you try and build a case and you realize, oh, you know what, this is a little bit crazy, I think I'm overreacting at little things, then there you go. Either way, you get a solution. Maybe you can't expose the thing or the creature or the person or whoever it is and try and be better. But anyways, if you have any comments, concerns, questions, anything of the sort, please make sure to leave a comment down below. I read all of them and I will be sure to respond to all of them. And if you stayed this far into this video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the support. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more content. I'm going to try and be better about doing daily uploads. I appreciate you all. This has been Cece. Goodbye.